There are nights when the rain doesn't fall to nourish the earth, but to wash away something people dare not name. That night the town of Southwell did not sleep. A sudden summer storm swept through, tearing open the sky with streaks of lightning. The golden lights inside the small homes flickered, trembling, as if they might be torn from the ground at any moment. At 2:03 a.m., a police car bearing the plate 7A1014 screeched to a stop on the edge of District 5, a place locals called the safe zone. But tonight, no one was safe. A young man was shoved out of the car. His collar was soaked, his hands cuffed behind his back. He didn't resist. He didn't scream. He only looked straight into the eyes of the police chief, holding an umbrella. "I told you not to come back," the chief said. "I never left," the man replied. Their words were few, sharp, and cold as the rain itself. The two officers present did not record anything. Their body cameras had their batteries removed. The arrest report was scribbled in haste with "disturbing the peace" as the reason. No witnesses, no statements. Just the rain and a man locked inside an unmarked vehicle that disappeared into the night unseen. 3 hours later, the file landed on Judge Martin's desk. No address, no lawyer, no listed family. Only a single name written in slashed, overlapping strokes: Elijah Moore. Martin stared at the file, and as he turned the first page, he felt the blood drain from his body, as if pulled back 30 years. Elijah Moore. The same name that had once appeared in his son's journal in the final month before the boy was shot and killed during a mission no one ever explained. Outside, the rain still fell. But inside Martin's chamber, the wooden gavel on his desk seemed to wait for something it had not been asked to strike in a very long time. Not for the right reason. There are those who once believed in the law until it took away the one they loved most. Judge Martin was now 62 years old. Every morning he made coffee with his left hand, his right still trembled slightly from surgery 4 years ago. He lived alone in a numberless wooden house less than a mile from the courthouse. No one knew he once had a son, and no one asked. There was only a single black and white photo hanging in his office, a young man in police uniform standing tall with eyes that burned. Elijah Moore. That name rose up like something buried deep in the soil he had tried to pack down for nearly 3 decades. When the file was placed on his desk the next morning, Martin stared at the first page, disturbing the peace. Defendant did not resist, did not testify. Attached was a blurred photo, a young man soaked in rain eyes, fearless only, still, strangely still. Martin never trusted intuition, he trusted the law, but that morning something in him, some remnant of a father, spoke. 9:20 a.m., courtroom 3, Elijah Moore was brought in through the side door. No handcuffs, but his hands rested behind his back, the posture of someone who had been locked up more than once. Martin sat on the raised bench, his face unreadable, but when their eyes met, every sound in the room seemed to stop. Name of the defendant, Elijah Moore. Do you have legal representation? No need. Do you understand the charges against you? I don't care what they call it. It wasn't defiance. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was simply the truth spoken without expecting to be believed. Martin raised his hand to continue reading the indictment, but his finger stopped on a strange marking at the end of the file, a round stamp not from any department he recognized, and a small italicized note temporarily sealed, internal hearing. Martin looked up. Elijah was still looking at him with the same gaze his son once carried in the photo he used to keep in his wallet the day the boy said, "Dad, if one day I don't come back, don't believe everything they write about me." Martin clenched his fist, then looked directly at the defendant. All right, Elijah Moore. We'll start over. But this time I'll be the one listening to you. The Southwell courthouse was more crowded than usual, not because of the nature of the case, but because of the defendant himself. Elijah Moore had once been the subject of several sealed internal reports and had vanished from the town without a trace or explanation. His reappearance was not listed in any registry. No address, no records of movement, no defense attorney. You have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, the court will appoint representation. Elijah replied curtly, "No need." Judge Martin sat high above eyes, scrutinizing. He had presided over many self-representation cases, mostly either arrogant or desperate individuals. But Elijah was neither. "You're so confident you think you can win?" Martin asked. Elijah met his gaze. "I didn't come here to win, sir. I just don't have anyone left I trust to speak for me." A minute of silence passed in the courtroom. No one moved. No paper rustled. Only the pounding of Martin's heart, not out of anger, but because he understood that feeling. The feeling of having to speak for yourself against a system that had taken someone you loved. Martin leaned back, his voice shifting. "All right then, speak. No template, no procedure. Tell me not as a defendant, but as a human being. Elijah Moore, why are you here?" Elijah drew a deep breath, then spoke not a statement, but a memory. 8 years ago I worked for an unofficial unit, no name, no badge, but tasked with cleaning up gaps within the police system. During one mission, I discovered a special patrol team abusing their authority to suppress civilians. They called it preemptive threat control. But in reality, it was extortion, silencing, creating guilt where there was none. I filed a report, and from that moment, all my data disappeared. I became a name with no record. Your son, Officer Martin Jr., was the only one who believed me, and the price he paid was death during a mission orchestrated by that very same unit. The courtroom fell into complete silence. A clerk dropped a pen. Martin remained still, his eyes clouded, not from age, but because the truth just spoken had unearthed a grave no one had dared to dig up until now. "I don't need a lawyer," Sir Elijah said quietly. "I just need someone who still has the courage to hear the rest." After the hearing, Martin didn't return home. He drove straight to the courthouse's underground archive, the kind of place only those who had lost something to the system still remembered how to enter without light. The old iron key was still in the inner pocket of his vest, the one he hadn't worn since the day his son died. The vault creaked open. Inside was a wooden box, no label, no index number, not part of any digital record. Just a single handwritten line faded with time more. Unclassified. Martin put on his reading glasses. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the first page. Sept 17. Internal Note Unit 11B reports. Elijah Moore refused to sign off on the mission to neutralize potential threat in Sector P. Additional note: signs of insubordination, monitor closely. The next page was a copy of the investigation conclusion into Officer Martin Jr.'s death, his son. Workplace accident slipped during pursuit. No photo, no map, no witness testimony from colleagues. Just a single witness statement cut off mid-line, the remainder blacked out in thick ink. He said someone in the unit had redacted, "If I disappear, ask about 11B." Martin closed his eyes. He remembered his son's words a week before his death. "There's one man I believe is genuine. His name is Elijah. If something happens to me, don't trust the file too quickly, Dad." Martin returned to his desk. He turned on the lamp, its warm yellow glow falling over the case file that now felt heavier than ever. On the final page was a photograph, a group of young officers standing in a row. Elijah was in the center. Next to him, Martin Jr. Both of them were smiling. On the back of the photo was a handwritten line, the red ink blurred by water. When the law is no longer just look for the one who still remembers what's right. Martin looked up, his eyes burning not with rage, but with the fire of a man who for the first time in his career as a judge understood not every courtroom exists to judge guilt. Some are meant to reclaim the humanity that justice once forgot. Near midnight. The wooden house at 18B was dark, but no one inside was sleeping. Martin sat at his desk holding the receiver of an old rotary phone, coiled cord, dusty body, and connected to only one person, Jack. Jack had once been a senior inspector, the kind who hung up his badge and vanished from all records after a case was forced shut. Martin dialed. One ring. The line picked up, no name, no greeting. You're calling because of the name Moore, aren't you, and because of my boy. I need to know, was his death really an accident? Silence. Then Jack replied, his voice raspy like wind scraping across an old scar. An accident, no Martin. Your son was the last one brave enough to defend Moore, and the last one who dared to question Unit 11B before they disappeared. Martin froze. He looked down at the gavel on his desk. It wasn't heavy, but every time he brought it down, it changed a life. A single word sentenced could be the end of someone's world, or the end of the last decent part of himself. Jack continued. I have the original report, the one that wasn't altered. But Martin, if you open it, you'll no longer be the untouched judge. You'll be a witness, a traitor to the system. What system lets my son die and calls it an accident? What system lets a boy like Moore disappear and return in silence? Jack didn't answer. He simply gave an address. Warehouse 27, edge of the Western Woods, and one final sentence before hanging up. If you still remember what your gavel once stood for, bring it with you. Martin stood. He opened the bottom drawer and took out a small wooden box, dust-covered. Inside was the first gavel he had ever used when he took office untouched, since the day his son died. He wiped it clean with his sleeve, not to make it shine, just to feel it was still there. And then he whispered a sentence meant for no one else, only for the son he had lost. This time I won't sit still. The Southwell holding facility was a row of damp, gray brick buildings tucked behind the old courthouse, a place that hadn't received inmates in years. But that night, Martin went there. He didn't come to speak with an officer. He came to find the one man everyone had forgotten, the night watchman, old Walter. Walter had once been a guard at the former detention wing, the kind that held sensitive inmates whose records were never made public. Now he swept courtrooms each morning and kept the furnace running with coal instead of the broken electric system. Martin found him behind the storage shed, sitting under an oil lamp peeling an apple. They had once been colleagues, but in 30 years they had never spoken outside of work. I need to talk, Walter. It's late. It's about Elijah Moore. Walter's hand paused. The knife slipped off the apple's skin and left a deep slice. Blood beaded at his fingertip, but he didn't flinch. He simply looked at Martin with the eyes of someone who had known too much and stayed silent for too long. That boy. He shouldn't be here. What do you mean? I mean, he once saved my daughter's life. Martin fell quiet. Walter spoke. Back then, Unit 11B had control over this entire town. They used the excuse of riot prevention to arrest innocent people, interrogate them, silence them. My daughter Lily was taken because she tried to speak out. No one dared to intervene. But Elijah, that kid, he forged a transfer order to get her out. Alone. No weapons, no backup. And after that, He vanished from the system like he never existed. Walter opened an old tin box. Inside was a broken name tag, Moore, self-erased. He gave it to me before he disappeared. Said, "If I'm ever arrested again, don't believe the reason." "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Martin asked. Walter gave a faint smirk. "Because back then you believed in the law, and I didn't. But if you're coming to me now, it means you're starting to wonder who the real criminals are." Martin held the broken name tag in his hand, and it felt as if the entire system he once upheld was cracking with it. "Are you willing to testify?" he asked. Walter looked up. The wind stirred gently through the fence. "I have nothing left to lose, Martin. But that boy still has something worth preserving." 9 a.m., courtroom 1 was packed. Not because of the charges, but because for the first time Judge Martin himself had called to reopen a hearing. No formal indictment, no motion for acquittal. The press was absent. Media access had been blocked. But rumors spread fast. Old man Martin is about to crack an old case. Elijah was brought in, still silent as ever. But this time his eyes weren't cold. They waited. Not for forgiveness, but for someone to truly hear. Martin entered. On the bench lay his first gavel, not the polished one, but the one he used his very first year on the job. The one his son used to play with, used to toss around once, asking, "Dad, is this what you use to judge people?" "No. It's what you use to silence the room after they've finally been heard." Martin looked around the courtroom. "Today is not about judging Elijah Moore," he began. "It's about judging how we did nothing when we should have." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Some reacted. Some lowered their heads. A few internal officials quietly stepped outside. Martin continued. "I have received testimony from an independent witness, Mr. Walter, who personally witnessed the wrongful detainment involving Unit 11B. I now hold the unaltered report, the audio recordings from the guardhouse, and a confession that Moore once saved someone the authorities tried to erase. And more importantly, I have something I lost a long time ago, faith in the instinct of being human." He turned to Elijah. "Do you have something to say, not to defend yourself, but to be remembered?" Elijah stood. His eyes moved slowly across the room. "I'm not here to be forgiven. I'm here so that what I've kept silent doesn't get buried again. I'm not a good man. I once worked for a broken system. But I chose to step away, and they chose to erase me. If I walk free today, I won't be coming back. But if I stay silent, who will be the next one locked up for public safety?" Martin gripped the gavel in his hand. No one objected, because no one had the standing to do so anymore. He set the gavel on the bench. He did not strike it. He simply said, "The court dismisses this case not because the defendant is innocent, but because the system is no longer transparent enough to judge him. And I, Martin E. Halstead, from this moment forward, formally call for a reopening of the investigation into Unit 11B." Elijah did not smile, but as he stepped out of the courtroom, he paused beside Martin and whispered, "Your son once told me, you were the last man who could listen without judgment. Thank you for not proving him wrong." Late in the afternoon, courtroom 1 was empty. But Martin remained there alone, sitting before the worn wooden bench, aged by the years. On the table, the gavel lay still, not as a symbol of judgment, but as a silent mirror to the soul. The case file of Elijah Moore had been transferred to the Special Prosecutor's Office. The investigation into Unit 11B was officially reopened. Moore's name was no longer listed as a defendant, but he did not stay to celebrate. Elijah left early the next morning. No forwarding address, no signature to confirm his release. Martin asked the clerk, "Where has he left this behind?" On Martin's desk was a folded note. Inside a single line, "Someone once saved me with their trust. Today I return it with the truth." Alongside the note was half of an old broken gavel it once belonged to Martin's son. Martin held it in his hand, and it felt like reclaiming a fragment of memory he thought he had lost forever. That night, Martin left the courthouse late. As he locked the door, he paused before the wall behind the judge's bench. There he rehung the first gavel he ever used when he took office, no longer polished, but still carrying the weight of all the years of doubt and reflection. On its wooden surface, he carved a line small, almost unreadable unless one leaned in close. Justice does not always need to win, but it must never stay silent again. The next day, Martin's seat was empty. He had officially retired. No press conference, no farewell. All that remained was a single note left in his office: "I am not resigning from the law. I'm only refusing to continue judging when no one has truly listened." Elijah left the courtroom just as the sun touched the final step of the courthouse. The last light of day stained the cracked walls, making them look like the skin of a creature that had slept too long and had just awakened. There was no one to see him off. No applause. No photographs. Elijah said nothing. He descended the steps as if each one released a memory from his shoulders. A few officers stood at a distance whispering. A few former staff looked away, avoiding his gaze. Only Martin from the second floor watched through a half-open window, his aging eyes no longer judging, but holding something far deeper. Something few still possessed after all those years: respect. Elijah knew he was being watched, and for that reason, he didn't look back. Inside his jacket pocket was a folded, weathered piece of paper, a summons for internal investigation, dated 1995, whistleblower officer Martin Jr., associated missing person Elijah Moore. Investigation outcome: identity unverified. Record erased from the system. Elijah held it, then burned it by the sidewalk. Not out of revenge, not to erase the past. Simply because today he was no longer the one being hunted. That afternoon at the town post office, a small package was sent. No specific recipient, only marked Southwell Courthouse. Archives Department. Inside was a USB drive containing audio recordings from the detention facility, and a note: "I don't want my name remembered. Just don't throw away what I said." That same evening, Martin returned home. On his porch was a charcoal mark, 2 parallel lines crossed by a single stroke. It was the symbol his son used whenever he closed a case. Martin saw it and nodded. No thank you letter, no headlines. Just a symbol to let him know the one once called erased from the system had finally been restored as a human being. On Monday morning, the highest judge's seat in Southwell's courtroom was found empty. No resignation letter, no farewell press conference, no goodbye. Only a white cloth draped over the wooden gavel with a handwritten note in blue ink: "I am not resigning from justice. I am simply stepping aside to make room for those who still believe without needing to despair." M.E. Halstead. The young court clerk trembled as he picked up the gavel and placed it back in its wooden case. No one dared to sit in the high chair that day. And for many weeks after, all hearings were moved to courtroom 2 as a silent act of respect for the one who had once sat there, but never used power to silence anyone. At a small school in the northern part of the state, a civic class went on as usual. A young teacher told the story of a strange trial where a man was acquitted not by law, but by the final thread of trust between human beings. A boy raised his hand and asked, "So where is that judge now?" Miss the teacher smiled. "No one knows for sure. But they say he still reads case files. Just not on paper, only in his heart." That evening, in a distant town, inside a small cafe, a man wearing a low-brimmed hat sat alone by the window. On the table was an old newspaper with the faded headline, "Former Southwell Judge Resigns Without Explanation. More Case Closed." The man folded the paper pulled from his pocket, a small wooden gavel hand-carved, and left it on the table. Etched deeply into its side was a single line. "If you don't speak today, who will speak for you tomorrow? Thank you for listening to a story that is neither loud nor glamorous, where no hero rides in on a white horse at the final moment. Only an old man who's no longer quick on his feet, and someone who was once erased daring to face each other without turning away from a truth that had long been hidden." This story is not meant to condemn, nor to glorify anyone. It is simply a reminder sometimes the bravest thing isn't an act, but the willingness to stand up when no one else dares to say, "I believe you." If something in this touched you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Not with many words, just enough so that someone else out there might also come to know justice is not always struck by a gavel. Sometimes it's kept alive by one person who never gave up on listening. Thank you, whoever you are, for staying after the final echoes faded. And if you can, don't let anyone else walk away without someone daring to ask, "What did you truly do?"